And in other news tonight, a developing story out of Michigan. At least 4 people were killed and several others wounded after a gunman opened fire inside a Mormon church and then set it on fire.
4 worshipers died. 8 more were wounded. And a community completely fractured.
My understanding, there's been approximately 324 mass shootings this year. We just got into the fourth quarter yesterday. So we're on a trajectory to have a shooting every day.
By people and systems that prefer symbolic closure to substantive change.
No one needs to have those type of events if those type of security is not going to exist.
Hill of Justice is sponsored and produced by Jermaine Delmas Studios.
Welcome to the Hill of Justice. Imagine on Sunday, sunlight through the stained glass, kids in the foyer, elders folding hymnals. That image, that sense of safety is what we trade our time for every week. Now imagine an engine roaring of a truck and then it slamming through your front doors. Imagine the pews splintering, smoke filling the sanctuary, and a man moving with a rifle. That is exactly what happened in Grand Blanc Township, Michigan. 4 worshipers died. 8 more were wounded. And a community completely fractured. Why target a house of worship? Why choose spectacle over a quiet attack? And why do survivors forgive in the face of such brutality? And what does that forgiveness do to the idea of justice? I'm Jerome Hill, and with me is retired Sheriff Victor Hill. So we have, once again, a mass shooting. And this is on surveillance, and witness reports placed this crash at about roughly 10:25 in the morning. So a pickup barrels into the front doors of this church, the Church of Latter-day Saints. And of course, glass, wood explodes inwards. He exits and he has a rifle in his hand and he moved with purpose. He didn't even wander. He just executed a plan that, combined with ramming his car, gunfire, and then sets a fire on top of that. So we know that that's not random. That's basically choreography. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to give my condolences to the Church of Latter-day Saints. We've all met Mormons. They've come to our door. I spent some time in Utah for some training. I got to meet a lot of them, make friends with them. Very peaceful, nice people. And, it angers me to see something like that happen. I'll tell you this. Has it been a psychological autopsy on this guy yet? Has anything come out about who he is, what his motive was? Did he ever attend the church? Did he ever date someone? Has any of that come out yet?
I'm glad that you asked that. So basically, he's an ex-Marine, middle-aged, someone in the town who had grievances, and some of it personal. And yes, I guess he had tried to have some personal relationships with people at the LDS. And so he had some animus towards that community. And so this wasn't just, isolated hatred. He welded definitely a personal rejection towards them because he was personally rejected and he had some failed relationships. And that was...
What type of failed relationships? Dating?
Romantic.
Romantic, okay.
And also with the church. So there was some type of falling out of some sort, according to reports. And then we can go ahead and, of course, we can't go ahead and the elephant's in the room. There's untreated trauma there, right? So, and that's where we're looking at if you want to talk.
Okay. Well, here's my thoughts. My understanding, there's been approximately 324 mass shootings this year. We just got into the fourth quarter yesterday. So we're on a trajectory to have a shooting every day. It may not happen every day, but if you look at the amount that have happened thus far this year, that means that there'll be one for every day of the year. That's very, very dangerous. Let me tell you why. Because if the 6-degree theory is true, that we're 6 people away from knowing everyone on the planet, for everyone sitting there watching this show, for you and I, if we haven't had a family member or friend or victim of a mass shooting, that means that this is eventually going to touch all of us, where we're losing one of our loved ones. It's not just something we're watching on TV and we're saying, oh, we're so sorry. We're going to be the ones grieving. It's going to take aggressive and proactive law enforcement to put a stop to this. It's the only way to stop it. And, all of the people, the whatever you want to call them, the hug-a-thug people, whoever they are, no, don't do this, don't do that. That's going to have to stop. If we don't, people are going to continue to die. We're at the point right now where the National Guard, the military, is a very viable option. I mean, I don't know who could be mad if they were standing in front of every church and every school right now while they're in, to make sure that some lunatic doesn't come in and start killing kids or killing parishioners or whatever like that. But even deeper than that, what has to happen is this, and I did a lot of this as sheriff. These people leave clues before they do it. They usually make threats. They do something on social media. There's a manifesto. They tell somebody something, and people miss the signs, or they just don't want to get involved, or they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings.
Right, because neighbors described him as being withdrawn and bitter.
Exactly. And those type of things have to be reported and have to be looked into. There was a couple of guys in my county that they were doing and say some things that were of concern, and things they did. We thought that, one of them was walking in and out of the city hall in Jonesboro, yelling and screaming at people. And I sent members of the SWAT team to go see him. Hey, what's going on with you? Are you thinking about this? Do you have any weapons? You mind if we search your house or whatever like that? Have you had, are you dealing with any minute issues or whatever? And, he didn't like that. But guess what? Nothing ever happened. And he fit the profile of somebody who would do something like that if it went unchecked. And they had to tell him, look, we're going to be watching and monitoring you, especially when you come around public places, because you're not acting too bright.
Right. Now, let's get back onto, I think you got a good thing coming along here with, let's get tactical for a minute. Okay. So houses of worship are open by design. We know that. And they advertise welcome, right? Now, theological openness creates vulnerability. That's how I see it. Amen. And we treat it as a feature and not a risk at this point. But we're going to have to change that mindset, and because we are at a point now where the way look at the contrast. We look at banks, we secure them. We try to secure schools now, and you see what's happening with the schools, and certainly airports are locked on. These are hardened perimeters that we have. We have drills for them. We have all these redundancies in place, but we accept more risk in a place where families gather, like churches, than not.
I agree. It's no longer business as usual. Anywhere now where a group of people gather, there has to be command and control. You're going to have to control the territory, or you're open, it's acceptable to this type of violence. And we've seen it happen in so many venues. Look at Las Vegas, where there's an open concert and a guy picks a hotel room from a window to start picking people off. Mm-hmm. When I was sheriff, there used to be these events, and they still go on down in Jonesboro. And I hope somebody's listening to this, because it was always a concern. And I had a talk with the city manager, and I said, listen, these are great. But what we got going on, there's a lot to be considered. I mean, your city police, are they checking all these rooftops to make sure there's nobody on top of it? Or, any place where there could be a sniper's nest. We're not controlling who's coming in and out, so anyone can walk up with a handgun. Are you taking a bomb dog and sweeping the area before the crowd come to make sure there's not a bomb there? and then maintain and control of that area to make sure someone doesn't drop a package off or whatever. I said, right now it's just all fun and games. We're doing stuff in the community and everybody's just a little bit relaxed. And then, now the cops get up and they start dancing with everybody. That looks real cute. But if you're up there dancing and a guy comes through the crowd and starts shooting at everybody, you got to switch from dancing and clowning to now I need to go into, and that's a hard switch to make. Our job is to watch that perimeter to make sure that people dancing and doing whatever they're doing is having a good time. Not to go out there and have a good time as well, too. I can't have a good time with you and protect you at the same time. If you look at real executive protection, the professionals. If you see somebody watching the person they're protecting, they're not doing a good job. If you're enamored and watching and listening to everything he's saying, that's not helping him. You need to be watching what's around him and making sure nothing doesn't get near him. The crowd's job is to listen to his speech or listen to his song. You're supposed to watch that crowd to make sure nothing gets near him. So nobody takes this serious until a lunatic pops up and starts shooting in the crowd. Nobody takes it serious until they come into the church. Now we've got to take any public venue and look for all of that. You can't even go to a college now and speak out in the open. Remember this, when JFK got assassinated in a convertible, you never saw a president ride in a convertible again. Now we've had 2 open venues, one with Charlie Kirk, one with the president, where somebody was able to lay down somewhere and take a shot. So unless we're going to have counter snipers around, unless we're going to have that type of security, no one needs to have those type of events if those type of security is not going to exist.
Well, we're talking about the haves and the have-nots. And so I was doing a little bit of research on this. And so larger congregations are far more likely to employ armed security. So there was a survey done in 2023 by Lifeway Research, and it showed that churches with about 250 or more attendees are most likely to have both uniformed police and security on site. And this is, of course, we need to move more onto that, for sure. But, we talk about all types of cultures, right? But the theological culture we need to talk about too, and changing that mindset, because many congregations resist the idea of security because it feels like living in fear. And I respect the impulse, right? But here's the line that they have to understand. I'm going to repeat this because it probably bears, repeating. Faith without careful consideration is charity to the next killer. So you can go ahead and feel all safe that you want because of your faith, but then you're going to be crying afterwards because a killer's gone into your congregation and slaughtered them all.
Brother, I thought you was getting ready to quote a scripture. Actually,
No,
there's a scripture
that
says faith without works is dead.
Was that
We
right?
got to get you back in church, by the way. But
that's okay.
Okay, but anyway, another argument for another time.
Right.
But anyway, there's a scripture that says faith without works is dead. So it is written in the word that there has to be faith and there has to be work along with the faith.
Right.
I think we've all heard that infamous story that you usually hear in church, and about a hurricane and a flood. And I think a boat came by and said, "Hey, is the flood coming? Come." He said, "Hey, no, it's okay. I'm waiting on the Lord." A helicopter came by. He's like, "Go on. I'm waiting on the Lord." And then eventually he drowned. And as the story goes, he went to heaven and he asked the Lord. He said, "Hey, I had faith. I was waiting on you." He said, "Well, I sent a boat and a helicopter."
Come to think about it, Christ Fellowship Church down here in South Florida, Keith, that's in Palm Beach Gardens. This is a large church that we have down here, and it has like multiple campuses and tens of thousands of attendees. And guess what? They have their own dedicated security team. In fact, I believe the head of their security is a former U.S. Secret Service agent. And he really does do a lot. He makes it a concerted effort to consult with churches all around nationally to shore up their vulnerabilities. I think that that's an amazing job.
And I think it's a needed thing. Even for the churches that can't afford it, they've got to take certain precautions. If it's a small church, the doors need to be locked. And maybe there's going to be that one person in the church that can check everybody when they come in and make sure the place is safe. That's where we're at now. I mean, that's not uncommon. Especially in certain areas in town right here. I'm sure in Miami, just like it is here in Atlanta, there's certain places you go to, businesses, there's beauty salons where you can't just walk in. They have to keep the doors locked because if they do, anybody can walk in at any time. And, of course, we know the doors of the church are supposed to stay open, and they are open. They're open to come in and worship the Lord. But the physical doors are going to have to be locked. And there's going to have to be a control of who comes in and who comes out. At least we got to know when this person comes in, they don't have any weapons. And, I've been in a church one time where a mental health person walked in and started acting out, and that had to be handled. And fortunately, I was there, and a couple of other cops were there. People aren't really thinking, well, this is the house of the Lord. Everyone's going to be respectful. That was true at one time, but we're in a very, very different times. And this guy just walks in out of nowhere. Nobody never seen him, didn't know him. Didn't look like he'd taken a bath in a few days or so. We didn't, no one knew why he was there. The first thing we had to do was go and sit near him so we could watch him and make sure. And then next thing you look, when he started acting out, we had to escort him out. And fortunately, he didn't have any weapons on him.
Yeah, but think about that. Even a church is for refuge. So why wouldn't the poor go there? Why wouldn't somebody like that go there? You have to have enough foresight to know that these are conditions. If you're inviting the poor, the sick, the weak, the mentally challenged, come on, they're coming. And you have to be prepared for that, which gets me to my other point. What was fascinating about this was one survivor, while kneeling beside her dying father, she reportedly looked the shooter in the eye and forgave him. I will not argue this, that I guess so much the sacredness of forgiveness. But I have to ask this question. When forgiveness by itself becomes the headline, right? Which this made headlines, by the way. Does it risk becoming a way to avoid systemic accountability? Because people draw to that type, and it raises what faith is, right? But does it let institutions off the hook? Like, as far as I'm concerned, much like we hold responsibility to our city leaders and so on and so forth, should we start now looking at churches to say, hey, guess what? You are now a soft target. People in that church now are soft targets. You have to do a job to protect them.
I believe that peace is achieved through strength. I believe that weakness attracts aggression. Now, I'm not going to say that forgiveness is weakness. I do believe forgiveness is strength, and it's probably a level of strength that you and I haven't reached yet. Charlie Kirk's funeral was very interesting to me because two people got up that really impressed me. His wife, she got up and she impressed me when she said that when she told the killer, hey, I forgive you. But I was also impressed when the president got up there and said, I know y'all probably not going to like this, but he basically said, I can't stand them. I can't stand none of these enemies right here, right? I respected his honesty. And, and that's probably kind of reminds me of you in a way, and probably me, to be honest. But there's a place for both, and there has to be balance. I believe that if we're going to talk about security and talk about the Bible, I believe that the Bible is accurate in both senses. There's a scripture called an eye for an eye in the Old Testament, and then there's a scripture that says you turn the other cheek. I think both are accurate. I mean, if my grandmother was still living and she slapped me, I would turn the other cheek. I'm not going to strike my grandmother. I mean, some dude on the street, I may knock him unconscious. You know what I'm saying? It's eye for eye. I think both are valid because there's a scripture in the Bible that says something to the effect of there's a time for everything, a time for everything, a time for peace, a time for war, a time for whatever. And I think when we're looking at security of the church, we got to balance those two scriptures, the eye for an eye and forgiveness. And then we also got to balance that scripture that says there's a time for everything, a time to live, a time to die, a time for war, a time for peace, a time to reap, a time to sow. It's a good book. You need to read it sometime. No pun intended, but I think we got to be balanced about that so we can protect these churches.
You know, what I am concerned about with forgiveness is that there's no doubt forgiveness can be a powerful tool, but it can be weaponized by people and systems that prefer symbolic closure to substantive change. And what I mean by that is this. If we say we forgive, we can't let that be the architecture of inaction. We can't do that. We have to have action. And I believe you said that under the thread of what you were talking about.
Absolutely.
You know, so we have turned holiness into a cover story. Case in point, thoughts and prayers. All the damn time. I hear that. I'm sick of that at this point. What is that doing for anybody? Nothing. So we say this and we have no action.
Well, I think again, it does help, but I think what happens is the imbalance. Again, the Bible is an amazing book, and I think some people, they concentrate on turning the other cheek. Some people, they concentrate on an eye for an eye. I think again, there's that balance. There's a time for everything. I mean, there are clear scriptures in the Bible. I know some people invaded the Israelites at some point when David was in charge and took the women and everything, and David prayed to God and asked him, hey, should I pursue? And his orders were clear. Yeah, go pursue. Go get them back. Go get them. And he did. And he went and he tracked them down and killed them and got all the women back and everything. So, you know, everything in the Bible is not about forgiveness. If you read Amos, God was very clear in his orders on how to deal with those people. If there are certain times when he gave, I think it was Joshua, clear commandments, spare them not. So it depends, Samson, he was very clear on some things that Samson needed to do. So I think all of the Bible is accurate. I just think that like that one scripture says, there's a time for everything, a time for peace, a time for war, and the balance to know when is what. We can't just allow people to worship God and then people come in and kill them and then say, hey, we forgive you and let's move on. Those people need to be stopped. They need to be dealt with. And I think after they're dealt with, then of course there's this process that you and I probably need to work on to forgive them. And there's all types of theories out there about why we forgive. Some people say it's not for them, it's for you. I don't know. Look here, I'm working on that myself. But we have to take action. The part I agree with you on is this. We can't just allow people to come in and prey on people because people are nonviolent and they're going to forgive you no matter what you do to them. That just can't happen. And if you read the good book in its entirety, the good book in its entirety doesn't completely talk about just turning the other cheek. Like I said, there's a very clear instruction from the Lord in one of those texts that says, hey, spare them not, men, women, oxen, whatever. Very clear. So even if you read the good book, the Lord didn't allow people to just come in and kill his flock. You know what I'm saying?
Right. So I believe that the church has a moral obligation. And the question is simple. If your sanctuary could choose between being open and being safe, what should you choose? I'm not choosing. Let's go ahead and be open, because you have a belief system that your faith dictates that this be open and let just anybody in. And living in the world and times we live in and subjugate people to getting slaughtered. There's not that. I don't have that faith. I mean, I don't know how you feel about that, but I just don't.
Well, I think anybody should come in. We just need to make sure they don't have a knife and a gun when they come in, or any other type of weapon.
Yeah, but
everybody
you have
should
people.
come in.
I'm with you on that, but
Right.
you have people of faith that wants to go against that and say, "Hey, guess what? We're talking about open. We're talking about completely open." And then where's the moral obligation with the church when something does happen? Should they get slammed?
Well, I think the argument is not just with the church. I think you got a legitimate point. It's not just with the church. There's politicians. There's politicians out there that's saying, no, we don't need the National Guard. We need programs. We need funding. We need hug a thug. And we know that that doesn't stop violent criminals from killing people. I think those people, quite frankly, have to be ignored. And we got to do what needs to be done to protect not just all these innocent people, but to protect those dummies as well.
Well, we have those same people that you're talking about, right? That are going ahead and say, you know what? Prayers, thoughts. I hope everybody takes care. No. We're past that. We've got to do more than just that. I'm not saying that the National Guard being involved in certain cities is necessarily a bad idea. What I'm saying is it's got to be much more than just that. That is not the only answer. And for people to go ahead and put their hat on that and believe that that is going to go ahead and solve, you can't put the National Guard everywhere. It's too voluminous of all these things that are unsecured and soft targets. So what are we doing now?
Well, we're not saying that the National Guard can solve it by themselves, but we're saying that's a good supplement because there's not enough manpower there. There's all kind of stuff that has to be done. Like I said earlier, we got to monitor people who show pre-attack indicators, people who make threats, people who are acting odd. They have to be monitored. You have to go and search their houses. You have to go and find out what they're doing or whatever. Do they have access to weapons and stuff? You know, there's a lot of people, well, you can't do that. You can't do whatever. If you can't, then we got to put the laws in place where you can. There has to be preventative measures. And there has to be folks standing at the door, standing guard. There has to be somebody searching when people go in. It's a whole comprehensive thing that happens. And yes, Jerome, there has to be thoughts and prayers too for the victims and the victims' family, but it has to be all of it, not just one side of it. So I'm with you on that.
Right. I'm just big on the action. I mean,
Right.
You know, the transparency with thoughts and prayers. I don't know the people who are saying that if they're sincere or not. You know, and maybe that doesn't matter. I do know this, though. I do know this. There has been multiple mass shootings also by ex-military within these weeks. And
I agree.
We're talking now maybe a deeper systemic failure in our reintegration with our military now. And we got to look at that.
It is. Let me tell you, to deal with this, we got to deal with mental health. There has to be better mental health screening. When we do find an issue, we can't just let it go. We can't just commit a person for 24 to 48 hours and then set them back out on the street. You know, we're going to have mental health detention centers. There are some people that they're going to have to be detained until their mental health is right. And some folks, mental health never will be. Some people have to be permanently detained in some type of mental health facility. We've got to go back to that because as long as they're walking free, they're going to have access to weapons and we're going to have a lot of that. So the first thing is we got to bring back the mental health facilities. A lot of that disappeared after that 1963 act was signed by Kennedy and they started closing and now there's no place for them to go and the jails have become the mental health center. If we can have a place for them to go, then we don't have to criminalize it, but yet they're still protected from themselves and protected from society. That's one step. And that step takes a while. And while that step is taking a while, we're going to have to start searching people. We're going to have to bring in the National Guard to stand guard. We're going to have to do what it takes because what we're doing now doesn't work.
Well, I agree with you on that. And it gets to this point where I have to go ahead and call out the mainstream media and the military. You know, they're tiptoeing around these subjects. And we know there's a link between the veteran status of people coming back and violence. I mean, I'm not saying it's all, that's not what my point is, but we have to do a better job in identifying and speak about the quiet part and bring that out to the forefront.
I agree. A lot of people don't want to step on toes, and
and we have to now. We're at a point now. We can't. Everybody wants to go ahead and protect another person's liberty. All over the board. And it depends on what hill you're willing to die on.
Let me say this. Let me say this in conclusion. A quick short story. My first term as sheriff, I get elected. Right as I'm coming in, there's a shooting at a party. 16-year-old girl gets hit in the head and dies. Matter of fact, we end up talking about that because we actually end up having someone on the show that was in that car when it happened. So now it becomes an issue. Then other parties start happening in the metro area. So people are terrified for their kids to go to these parties. Very dear friend of mine, state representative, his daughter was going to a party. He was very, very upset. He called me up. He said, hey, my wife has let my daughter go to this party. I can't let it happen. I was like, well, tell her not to go. My wife already told her she could go. I need your help. What'd you need? He said, I need you to shut that party down. And I was like, well, I just can't shut a party down. But I said, let me take a look at it. Well, it turns out it needed to be shut down. It was a huge fire violation or whatever. So I told him, I said, look, I got a reason to shut this party down. I said, but one thing I need to let you know. If I shut this party down, they're going to assume it's you. And you told me to do this. You ready for that? He said, yeah, shut it down. We shut the party down. I talked to him about 2 days later. I said, how's everything going? He said, everything's fine. I said, your wife, daughter, they still mad at you? He said, yeah, they haven't spoken to me since. I said, you all right? He said, yeah, I'm fine. I'd rather have a mad daughter than a dead daughter. Okay, these people can get up here and talk about all the National Guard and how we don't need to do this or whatever. Forget them. I'd rather have everyone alive, including them with their crazy thinking, than to be talking about another mass shooting. Let's stop it.
Right. Let's land the plane right there. If you felt this episode pushed the conversation further, help us by building this community that we have going on. My brother and I would deeply appreciate. Like the video, drop a comment, and please give us your take about what we spoke about today. And make sure you hit that subscribe button too. So never miss the next episode we're about to have. Your voice and action keeps this conversation alive, and your support makes this definitely about the truth getting out. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you on the next episode.